The sun blazed over Dry Creek as 3 cowboys rode up to the widow's farm, smirking as they dismounted and kicked at her fence posts. "This land's wasted on a woman," one sneered, spitting into the dirt. But when the Apache widow stepped onto the porch, her eyes steady and unflinching, their laughter faltered. Something in her gaze carried a warning sharper than any rifle, and before the day ended, those men would learn why her reaction terrified everyone. The widow's farm sat on the edge of the desert, a lonely stretch of dry soil and weathered boards that had endured storms, drought, and loss. For years, Eleanor had worked it alone, ever since her husband's death left her with nothing but a plot of land and the grit to defend it. She rose with the sun, mended fences with her bare hands, and planted corn in soil that seemed to fight her every season. Life had carved lines into her face, but her back remained straight, her eyes sharp. In Dry Creek, whispers followed her, a woman alone, an Apache widow, too proud to sell her land, too stubborn to bend. Men muttered that she should remarry, that she couldn't last. But Elena had learned long ago that silence was stronger than words, and work spoke louder than gossip. That morning, as she stacked hay near the barn, the sound of hooves broke the stillness. She looked up to see 3 cowboys riding toward her property. Their laughter carried on the wind, loud, careless. They weren't strangers. She'd seen them swagger through town, men who drank too much, gambled too freely, and believed the world belonged to them. They rode past the fence line without slowing, trampling through her field as if it were theirs. Dust rose in clouds as they dismounted, boots crunching against the dry earth. One of them kicked at her fence post, snapping the wire loose. "This land don't belong here," he muttered, "better in stronger hands." Eleanor stood still, her hands resting lightly on the pitchfork she carried. She didn't speak, she didn't flinch. Her silence pressed heavier than any shout, and for the first time the men's smirks wavered. The tallest cowboy stepped closer, his shadow falling across her boots. "What's a woman like you gonna do if we decide to take what's ours?" Elena lifted her chin, her voice calm, almost soft. "Try." The single word cut through the heat, slicing the silence open, and in that instant, even the cowboys sensed it. This farm was no easy prize, and the woman before them was no easy victim. The silence stretched, heavy as the desert heat. The cowboys exchanged glances, half amused, half unsettled by the widow's composure. They had come expecting fear, maybe tears, but instead found a woman who stared at them as if she had measured their worth already, and found it lacking. The tallest one, a man with a scar running from ear to jaw, spat into the dust and barked a laugh. "You've got a sharp tongue for someone standing alone." He reached for the fence post again, snapping another wire loose with deliberate force. The sound of breaking wood echoed like a challenge. Helena's grip on the pitchfork tightened, but she didn't move. Her eyes tracked his every motion. "That post took me 3 days to cut and set," she said calmly. "Break it again, and I'll make sure you regret the time you wasted." The words weren't shouted, but spoken with such steady certainty that the smirk faltered on his lips. His companions jeered to mask their unease. "Listen to her," the shorter one sneered. "Thinks she's a man, talking tough. Maybe she needs reminding she ain't." They stepped closer, their boots crunching on the dry soil, circling her like wolves testing prey. Elena's heart pounded, but she forced her breathing to stay even. She had lived through storms that tore roofs from houses, through winters that froze men in their saddles. She would not bend now. She raised the pitchfork, planting its tines in the dirt with a sharp thrust. "This is my land. My husband died on this soil. Every fence, every stone, every row of corn was set by my hands. You cross me here, you cross him too." The scarred cowboy chuckled, but the sound rang hollow. "The dead don't fight, lady." Elena's gaze didn't waver. "Then you'll see how hard the living can—" The men hesitated, caught between their bravado and the quiet weight of her defiance. One finally reached for her arm, his fingers brushing her sleeve. In a flash, Eleanor swung the pitchfork sideways, its wooden handle striking his wrist with a crack. He cursed, stumbling back, clutching his hand. The crowd of chickens in the yard scattered, feathers flying, their squawks filling the air like alarm bells. The other cowboys surged forward, anger snapping through their movements, but Elena's stance never faltered. She pointed the pitchfork toward them, her eyes like flint. "Try me again, and you'll leave more than wire broken." The scarred man snarled, hand drifting toward the revolver at his hip. For a heartbeat, the air froze. The decision balanced there, on the edge of violence. Then a voice cut across the tension. "Enough!" The sheriff's horse clattered into the yard, dust swirling as Amos Caldwell pulled up on the reins. He dismounted slowly, hand resting on his holster. His eyes swept the scene, the broken fence, the angry cowboys, the widow standing firm with her pitchfork. "You boys best leave before I haul you into town," Caldwell said. His voice was calm, but his eyes warned he wouldn't say it twice. The cowboys bristled, their pride wounded, but even they weren't foolish enough to challenge a lawman in daylight. The scarred one spat again, his glare fixed on Elena. "This ain't over, widow." "You think that stare's enough to keep us off? You'll learn." With that, they mounted their horses, dust rising as they rode off toward town. The sheriff turned to Elena, his mustache twitching with frustration. "You've got more steel in you than sense," he muttered. "Standing up to men like that'll only bring them back meaner." Elena lowered the pitchfork, her arms trembling from the effort of holding steady. "If I don't stand here, I'll be run over forever." "Better to face them now than spend a lifetime crawling." Caldwell studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You may be right, but keep your eyes open. Those men don't forget insults, especially not from a woman." Eleanor glanced at the broken fence, the splintered wood scattered in the dirt, her jaw set tight. "Then let them come. I've built before. I'll build again." The sheriff mounted his horse, shaking his head. "God help you, widow. You've just started something none of us can stop." As he rode away, the farmyard fell quiet again, save for the faint creak of broken wires swaying in the wind. Eleanor bent down, her fingers brushing the scarred wood. The fear in her chest hadn't left, but it burned now, reshaped into something harder. She stood staring toward the horizon where the cowboys had vanished. Her farm was small, her tools few, but she carried something they didn't understand, a resolve forged by loss, sharpened by survival, and that resolve would terrify them more than any weapon. The next day, the air in Dry Creek felt heavier than the heat itself. Word had spread fast. By sundown the night before, every man, woman, and child knew 3 cowboys had ridden onto the Apache widow's land and left with nothing but bruised pride. The story twisted in every telling. In one version, Elena had cursed them until their horses balked. In another, she had nearly gutted one with her pitchfork. Whatever the truth, it was enough to turn her farm into the center of every whisper. When Elena rode into town with her wagon for flour and salt, the stares followed her like shadows. Some tipped their hats, silent but respectful. Others turned away, muttering darkly. A shopkeeper's wife leaned close to her neighbor and hissed, "She's bringing trouble down on all of us. Mark my words." Elena ignored them, stepping into the mercantile with steady steps. She paid for her goods without a word, but when she turned to leave, the door swung open hard. The same 3 cowboys stood there, grinning wide. "Well, look who it is," the scarred one drawled, his voice carrying through the store. "The little widow who thinks she's a warrior." The shorter cowboy laughed, leaning against the doorframe. "Careful, boys. She might swing that pitchfork again. Best keep your distance." Laughter rippled among a few townsfolk, though others shifted uncomfortably. Elena set her sack of flour on the counter and met their eyes without flinching. "If you came for supplies, buy them. If you came for trouble, you'll find it." The scarred cowboy stepped closer, his boots grinding against the floorboards. "You think one lucky swing makes you untouchable. Out there in the dust, you had the sheriff watching your back. But he ain't here now." Before Eleanor could reply, Sheriff Caldwell's voice cut across the room. "Ain't here. I'm right behind you." The crowd parted as Caldwell stepped in, his hand resting near his holster. His mustache twitched, his gaze steady on the 3 men. "I warned you boys once. Don't make me repeat myself." The cowboys chuckled, but their smirks faltered under his stare. The scarred one muttered, "We ain't done with her," before turning sharply and striding out. The others followed, spitting in the dirt as they went. When the door swung shut, the room exhaled as one, but the whispers started immediately. "She'll get herself killed. She should sell that farm before it's too late. or she'll bring them down on all of us." Caldwell glanced at Elena, his eyes heavy. "You've stirred a hornet's nest, widow, and the more you stand, the harder they'll sting." "I don't scare easy," Elena replied. The sheriff studied her a moment, then nodded. Maybe that's what scares them. By the time she left town, the whispers had hardened into something else. Division. A group of ranch wives watched her pass with wary respect, murmuring about her courage. But others muttered about bad luck, about Apache curses, about pride dragging everyone into ruin. That night, back on the farm, Daniel Harper, the widowed neighbor who often brought her spare tools, rode over. He dismounted stiffly, his face grave. "They were riled up in town today. Half of them think you're trouble. The other half, they're waiting to see if you break." Elena poured him a cup of water, her expression calm. "And what do you think?" He hesitated, then said, "I think you've got more grit than most men I know. But grit's what gets people killed in these parts." She met his eyes steadily. "Grit's also what keeps the land from swallowing us whole." Daniel shook his head, almost smiling despite himself. "Your husband would have been proud, but I fear for you, Elena. They'll be back, and next time they won't stop at fences." As the neighbor rode off, the night pressed heavy. Coyotes howled in the distance, their cries weaving with the rustle of dry brush. Elena sat on the porch, her pitchfork resting beside her. The memory of those jeering faces etched into her mind. She knew the Cowboys weren't finished. They had been humiliated once, then twice in town. Their pride would demand escalation. And pride, she knew, was more dangerous than hunger or greed. As the moon rose, she whispered into the silence, "Let them come. They'll learn again." The night fell heavy over the farm, the air thick and still. Eleanor had finished her chores early, locking the barn doors and checking the fence line twice. The memory of the Cowboys' smirks lingered like smoke in her chest. She knew they would return. Men like that didn't let humiliation rest. They fed on it until it burned through their veins. She kept a lantern burning low inside the kitchen, her pitchfork propped against the door, her late husband's rifle lying across the table. The clock ticked past midnight. The only sound was the restless shuffle of the horses in the corral, their hooves striking the earth. Then came the crunch of footsteps. Eleanor's breath stilled. She doused the lantern in one swift motion, plunging the room into darkness. Through the window she saw them, 3 shadows moving low across her yard, the faint glint of steel in their hands. They hadn't come to scare her this time. They had come to take— The scarred cowboy's voice hissed through the dark. "Check the barn. She's got nowhere to run." Eleanor slid silently to the back door, her bare feet soundless on the floorboards. She grabbed the rifle but didn't lift it yet. Shooting them down outright would only bring the law down on her head. No, she would fight on her terms. The first man pried at the barn door, the wood creaking under his grip. Eleanor slipped into the yard, moving through shadows until she stood behind the chicken coop. The shorter cowboy lit a match, the sudden flare throwing his face into sharp relief. He bent to set the barn alight. That was her moment. She hurled a bucket of water she'd hidden near the coop, dousing the match and his boots in one stroke. "You light my barn, you'll drown in it," she called, her voice cutting through the dark. The men spun, cursing. "There she is!" The scarred one charged forward, but Elena was faster. She jammed the pitchfork into the ground between them, its tines flashing in the moonlight like warning fangs. He stumbled, tripping over it, and fell hard into the dirt. The shorter cowboy lunged, but she swung the rifle butt into his jaw with a crack, sending him sprawling. Pain shot up her arms, but she didn't falter. The third man hung back, hand hovering over his revolver. His voice wavered, uncertain. "She's mad." Elena's eyes burned in the moonlight. "Mad enough to bury every last one of you." For a heartbeat, silence ruled the yard. Then the scarred man roared, scrambling to his feet. "You'll regret that, widow. We'll burn you out if it's the last thing we do." Before he could lunge again, a new voice boomed across the night. "Drop it!" Sheriff Caldwell rode in, lantern swinging from his saddle, revolver drawn. Behind him, 2 deputies followed, rifles leveled. The cowboys froze, rage twisting into panic. The sheriff dismounted in a flash, stomping into the yard. "I warned you 3, twice. Now you're mine." He cuffed the scarred cowboy across the head with his revolver, sending him reeling. The deputies moved fast, binding the others with rope. The scarred man spat blood, his glare still locked on Elena. "This ain't over. You'll pay for this. You hear me, woman? You'll pay." Caldwell shoved him toward his horse. "You'll pay first, behind bars." As the men were dragged off, Elena lowered the rifle, her chest heaving. The sheriff turned to her, his eyes narrowing. "You're tougher than any man in this town, widow. But you just made enemies who don't forgive." Elena wiped the blood from her lip, her voice calm despite the tremor in her hands. "I'd rather have enemies than masters." The sheriff studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "That may be what keeps you alive, or what gets you killed." When the dust settled and the riders vanished into the night, Elena stood alone in the yard. The barn was safe, her land still hers. But she knew the scarred cowboy's words weren't empty. Jail was only a delay. Men like him always found their way back, meaner than before. She picked up the pitchfork and set it against the barn, her shoulders straight despite the ache. Her hands shook, but her gaze was steady as she whispered into the quiet desert air, "Let them come again, I'll be waiting." Morning came with whispers thick as the desert dust. By the time Elena hitched her wagon and rode into Dry Creek, the whole town knew about the midnight fight at her farm. Sheriff Caldwell had marched the 3 cowboys into the jailhouse just before dawn, bloodied and bruised, and every tongue wagged with the tale. Some called it justice. Others called it madness. The saloon buzzed with arguments spilling into the street. One rancher shouted, "That woman's more man than half of us put together." A shopkeeper barked back, "She's trouble, always was, always will be. Mark me, she'll bring fire down on this town." As Eleanor passed, the stares cut sharper than knives. A few men tipped their hats, quiet respect in their eyes. A group of wives murmured to one another, clutching baskets tight, admiration and fear mingling on their faces. But others muttered openly, "She provoked 'em. She'll draw more like 'em. She should sell and go." Inside the mercantile, the shopkeeper placed her flour on the counter without a word. His wife leaned close, her whisper pointed, "If you've got sense, you'll leave before they get out of that jail." "Men like that don't forgive." Elena held the woman's gaze calm and steady. "Men like that don't frighten me." She set her coins on the counter, took her flour and left, her back straight, though her chest burned. Outside, a voice called after her, "Widow!" Daniel Harper, her neighbor, strode across the street, his face grave. He lowered his voice when he reached her. "You've got folks stirred up something fierce. Some admire you, but more think you've brought a curse. They say those men won't rot in that cell long. They'll come back meaner, and when they do, this whole town will pay." Elena tightened the reins in her hands. "If they come, they'll come for me. Not for the town." Daniel shook his head. "Doesn't work like that. Fear spreads. Folks already whisper about running you out. Better to cut you loose than risk the rest." Her jaw clenched, but she said nothing. The truth of it gnawed at her, sharper than she wanted to admit. That evening she found Caldwell waiting by her gate, his horse tied to the post. His moustache twitched as he tipped his hat. "Evening, widow." She eyed him warily. "You're not here for tea," he sighed. "You're right. Those boys are locked up now, but they've got friends. Friends with long memories and short tempers. Some townsfolk are saying maybe you ought to move along. Sell your farm before this festers worse." Elena's voice came low, steady. "This farm is mine. My husband died working this soil. Every fence post, every furrow, I built it. No one runs me off it." Caldwell studied her, half exasperated, half impressed. "You've got iron in you, but iron breaks if you strike it enough times, and they'll keep striking." She turned away, her hands tightening on the porch rail. "Then let them. I'll outlast them." The sheriff lingered a moment, then mounted his horse. "God help you, widow. You've made yourself a beacon, and beacons attract storms." As night fell, Eleanor sat alone on the porch, staring out at the empty desert. For the first time, the weight pressed heavy on her shoulders. She had stood against them, yes. She had bloodied their pride, driven them off twice. But now the whole town whispered her name like a curse or a legend, and she couldn't decide which was worse. The cicadas sang, the stars blinked awake. She thought of her husband, buried on the hill beyond the cornfield. She thought of his hands, rough with work, steady with strength, and wondered what he would tell her now. Probably the same words she had whispered to herself 100 times. Stand. Don't break. But even as she repeated it, a knot of doubt tightened in her chest. How many more nights could she stand alone before the storm broke over her for good? The church hall filled before sundown, lanterns flickering against the wood-paneled walls. Sheriff Caldwell had called the meeting, but everyone knew why they were there. The 3 cowboys sat in the jailhouse, restless as caged wolves, and the town buzzed with fear about what would happen when they walked free. Eleanor entered last, her presence silencing the murmurs. She stood near the back, arms crossed, her face unreadable. Every head turned, some with open hostility, others with quiet curiosity. Caldwell cleared his throat at the pulpit. "We've all heard the talk. Those men came onto her land, armed and mean, and she stood against them. I hauled them in myself. But they've got friends outside these walls, and fear's spreading faster than fire. We need to decide what comes next." A rancher jumped up, his voice sharp. "What comes next? We throw her out, that's what. She's the one they want. She can take her fight elsewhere. Why should we all bleed for her stubborn pride?" Shouts of agreement rose. Others muttered, unwilling to meet Elena's eyes. Daniel Harper pushed to his feet, his hands trembling but his voice strong. "You'd cast out a woman who's done nothing but defend her home. Shame on you." She stood alone against 3 armed men. "You call that trouble? I call it courage." The room split, half applauding, half jeering. The shopkeeper barked back, "Courage or arrogance? Every man in this town has a family to protect. Are we supposed to risk our children for her?" Eleanor's voice rang out, cutting through the noise. "They came for me because I wouldn't bend. You think giving me up will end it? It won't. You'll only show them this town is weak. And once they know that, they'll keep coming, first for me, then for all of you." Her words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Still, the fear was thick. From the corner, a young voice spoke. "She's right." Heads turned. It was Jonah Price, barely 20. A blacksmith's apprentice with soot still clinging to his hands. He stepped forward, cheeks flushed but eyes steady. "I was there that night. I saw her face them down with nothing but a pitchfork. If she can stand, why can't we? If we let her fall, we're not men, we're cowards." The hall erupted again, some shouting support, others sneering at the boy's youth. But his words carried a weight that lingered. Courage from someone so young made the older men shift in their seats, shame flickering across more than a few faces. Caldwell slammed his fist on the pulpit. "Enough! You all want safety? Then you'd best remember safety don't come from throwing away your own. It comes from standing together." But the divide was clear. Half the town muttered about driving Elena out before the Cowboys' friends rode in. The other half whispered about the need to hold fast, to show that Dry Creek wouldn't break. When the meeting broke apart, voices still hot with argument, Elena stepped into the cool night air. Jonah caught up with her on the steps, his face earnest. "They'll keep talking circles, ma'am, but I'll stand with you. I don't got much, just a hammer and a strong arm, but I won't see you fight alone." Elena studied him, her heart caught between gratitude and worry. "You're young, too young to be dragged into this." Jonah shook his head. "Too young to stay quiet while the whole town hides behind fear. My father used to say, if you don't draw a line, men will keep pushing until there's nothing left. You drew yours. Now I draw mine." For the first time in days, Elena felt something stir inside her chest, not just defiance, but the faintest spark of hope. Later, as she rode back to the farm, the desert stretched silent around her. The stars blinked overhead, cool and distant. She thought of Jonah's words, of Daniel Harper's defense, of the sheriff's warning. The town was breaking in half, torn between fear and pride. But maybe, just maybe, a few voices were enough to turn the tide. As she dismounted at the farm gate, she saw the broken fence post still waiting, scars of the first attack. She set her jaw, gripping the reins tight. She would mend them, as she had mended everything else. And when the Cowboys returned, as she knew they would, she would not be standing alone. The nights grew heavier after the church meeting. Though the Cowboys still sat in Caldwell's jail, whispers said their cousins and drinking partners were riding down from the northern range, itching to set things right. The saloon buzzed each evening with talk of vengeance, and though no one said it outright, everyone knew who the target was. Elena felt the weight of it in every step. When she walked through Dry Creek, people parted as though her shadow carried fire. Some whispered her name with awe, others with scorn. A group of women offered her bread in silence, pressing it into her hands before turning away, ashamed to be seen. A pair of ranchers muttered as she passed. Better she'd left when she had the chance. Back at the farm, loneliness pressed hard. The barn stood quiet, the corn rose brittle in the heat, the hills humming with cicadas. Each sound sharpened her nerves. Even the wind rattling through the wire fence felt like a warning. One evening, Daniel Harper rode over. His lantern bobbed in the dark, his face lined with worry. He swung down stiffly from his horse, shotgun slung across his back. "You shouldn't be here alone," he said gruffly. "Not with half the county's roughnecks whispering about payback." Elena wiped her hands on her skirt. "I've been alone a long time, Daniel. It hasn't killed me yet." He frowned, eyes searching hers. "You don't have to be. I know what they say in town. But I also know what I saw. You staring down 3 armed men with nothing but a pitchfork. I've got 2 sons, and I pray they grow with half that steel." His words caught her off guard. For so long she had carried her pride like armor, expecting only suspicion or disdain. To hear respect, even admiration, felt almost foreign. Before she could reply, another set of hoofbeats approached. Jonah Price rode into the yard, the blacksmith's apprentice, his shirt streaked with soot from the forge. He slid down from his horse, his jaw set. "Sheriff says they'll be out by week's end," he announced. "And when they are, they'll come here first," Daniel muttered. "Figures. Caldwell's rope is shorter than his patience." Jonah's eyes burned. "Then we'll be ready. I've been forging spikes, nails, whatever we can use. I'll bring 'em out tomorrow." Elena studied the young man, her chest tightening. "You've already done enough, Jonah. Don't make yourself a target too." He shook his head firmly. "I've made my choice. If they come for you, they come for me too. That's how it is." The silence that followed was heavy. Daniel looked at Jonah, then back at Elena. "Looks like you've got yourself a militia of 2, widow. Not much, but it's a start." Elena almost smiled. "Two's more than none." They spent the rest of the night patrolling the fence line, lanterns swinging, boots crunching on dry soil. The stars glimmered cold above, the desert vast and indifferent. Yet as they walked side by side, Daniel with his shotgun, Jonah with his hammer tucked into his belt, Elena felt something she hadn't in a long time. She wasn't alone. Later, when the men rode home, she lingered on the porch, staring into the night. Loneliness still pressed on her, but now it was edged with something else. Resolve. Even if the town cast her out, even if the Cowboys came in numbers, she would not bend. Still, doubt gnawed at her. How long could 2 men and 1 widow stand against the tide? Would the rest of Dry Creek stand by while her farm burned? As the wind rattled through the dry grass, she whispered into the dark, "If I fall, let me fall standing." In the distance, far off toward the ridge, a lone coyote howled. It sounded like both a warning and an answer. The clang of the jailhouse door echoed through Dry Creek like a death knell. By noon, the 3 cowboys were free men again, swaggering down the boardwalk as though they owned the town. Sheriff Caldwell stood stiff in the doorway, his jaw clenched, his eyes following them with bitter resignation. The law had limits, and everyone knew it. The scarred cowboy tipped his hat mockingly to a group of ranch wives who pulled their children close. "Miss us?" he drawled. His companions laughed, the sound jagged and mean. Elena was in the mercantile when she heard the noise. The shopkeeper's hands froze mid-count, his eyes darting nervously to the door. She felt the air shift, the tension rolling in like thunder before a storm. Slowly, she set down her sack of flour and stepped outside. The cowboys stopped in their tracks when they saw her. Silence swept the street. Townsfolk peeked from windows, clustered in doorways, unwilling to move but unable to look away. The scarred man smirked. the memory of his humiliation still burning in his eyes. Well, the widow herself. Thought you'd be gone by now. Elena stood steady, her hands loose at her sides. You thought wrong. His grin widened. Reckon so. But don't fret. We'll fix that mistake soon enough. Sheriff Caldwell stepped down from the boardwalk, his hand hovering near his revolver. That's enough. You so much as touch her, I'll see you buried in the desert. The cowboys laughed, but their eyes gleamed with violence. Law's thin out here, Sheriff, the shorter one sneered. Can't lawmen bleed just the same as widows? Caldwell's jaw tightened, but he didn't draw. The standoff stretched until the cowboys finally turned away, spitting into the dust as they stalked off toward the saloon. Their laughter trailed behind them, bitter and sharp. Elena exhaled slowly, then turned to find the townsfolk staring. Some looked at her with admiration, others with accusation. A rancher muttered loud enough for all to hear, She's gonna bring blood down on us. Best she leave before it's too late. Caldwell's voice cut through, harsh. She's not the problem. They are. But even he looked weary, as though his words carried no weight anymore. That night, Elena returned to her farm with Jonah and Daniel riding alongside. The three moved in silence, each lost in thought. The stars glittered cold above, the desert stretching endless around them. At the farmhouse, Jonah broke the silence. They'll come tonight, or tomorrow. Won't wait long. Daniel grunted. Then we'll be ready. They worked quickly, reinforcing the barn doors, sharpening stakes, checking rifles. Jonah set iron spikes along the fence, his hands blistered but steady. Daniel took up watch on the porch, shotgun across his lap. Elena moved through the house with quiet determination, her husband's knife tied to her belt. But when the preparations slowed, doubt crept in. She stood by the window watching the dark horizon. What if the town won't stand with us? She asked quietly. Daniel's voice was rough. Then we stand without them. Jonah straightened from the fence, sweat streaking his brow. Let them watch. Let them see what it means not to bend. Maybe it'll shame them into remembering who they are. Elena almost smiled. The boy carried a fire she recognized, the same fire that had kept her alive all these years. As the night deepened, silence wrapped around the farm. The only sound was the creak of the windmill and the restless shuffle of the horses. Eleanor sat on the porch, rifle across her knees, every muscle taut with waiting. Near midnight, a flicker of light appeared on the ridge. A torch, then another, and another. Jonah's voice was low. They're coming. The torches multiplied, weaving like serpents down the hillside. Shadows stretched long across the fields as the riders descended, their laughter faint but growing. Eleanor's pulse hammered, but her voice was steady. This is my land. They won't take it. Daniel gripped his shotgun. Jonah hefted his hammer, and the three of them braced as the torches closed in. The first hoofbeats thundered into the yard, dust exploding under the riders' boots. The cowboys reined in their horses, faces twisted in cruel delight. The scarred one pointed at the farmhouse, his voice cutting through the night. Burn it all. The first torch flew through the night air and smashed against the barn wall, flames licking greedily at the dry wood. Sparks scattered into the corral, the horses screaming and kicking against the fence. Another torch followed, crashing into the haystack, erupting into sudden fire that clawed at the sky. Elena didn't flinch. She rose from the porch, rifle in hand, her silhouette stark against the glow. Daniel fired the first shot, blasting the torch from the scarred cowboy's grip before it hit the farmhouse. The thunder of the shotgun echoed across the fields, sending the riders reeling. Back off, Daniel roared, but they didn't back off. The cowboys whooped, spurring their horses around the yard in a circle, trying to spread the fire wider. Jonah darted toward the barn, his hammer swinging, knocking burning straw to the ground and stomping it out. Smoke stung his eyes, but he didn't stop. Elena steadied her rifle, her breath sharp. She fired once, shattering the lantern of another rider. Oil splattered, flames dying in the dirt. The crowd of attackers cursed, their confidence faltering for the first time. The scarred cowboy snarled, pointing at her. Get the witch! Two riders charged the porch, revolvers raised. Elena dropped to one knee and fired again, her bullet splintering the post beside their heads. Daniel's shotgun roared once more, and one horse bucked, throwing its rider hard into the dust. Jonah staggered back from the barn, coughing, soot streaking his face. "Fire's dying." "Keep shooting." The yard became chaos. Gunshots cracking, flames hissing, horses screaming. Elena moved like she had trained her whole life for this night, reloading with steady hands, firing with precision that kept the attackers at bay. But the scarred cowboy was relentless. He dismounted, crouching low, slipping through the shadows like a predator. While the others distracted her, he crept toward the porch, a knife glinting in his hand. Helena sensed movement and spun, but he lunged too fast. The knife slashed across her sleeve, grazing her arm. Pain seared hot, but she drove the rifle's butt into his chest, sending him staggering back. He snarled, eyes wild with rage. "You'll pay, widow!" he spat, lunging again. This time, Elena didn't retreat. She grabbed the knife hand, twisting with all her strength. The blade clattered to the floorboards. She shoved him back, her voice cold and clear. "Not tonight." Before he could recover, Jonah barreled in from the side, hammer swinging. The iron struck the scarred man's shoulder with a crack, dropping him to his knees. He roared in pain, clutching his arm, his pride shattered more than his bones. The other cowboys saw him fall and faltered. Shots rang from the distance. Sheriff Caldwell and 2 deputies thundered into the yard, rifles raised. "Drop it!" Caldwell bellowed. The riders hesitated, fear flickering in their eyes. The flames sputtered low now, the barn still standing, the farmhouse untouched. Their leader lay in the dirt, groaning, his bravado burned away. One by one, the attackers wheeled their horses and fled into the night, their torches dying as they vanished into the desert. Only the scarred man remained, cursing, spitting, writhing in the dust. Caldwell hauled him up by the collar and slammed him against the fence. "You'll rot for this." Silence fell over the farm except for the crackle of dying flames. Smoke hung heavy in the air, glowing red under the stars. Daniel lowered his shotgun, his chest heaving. Jonah leaned against the barn, soot streaking his face, his hammer still clutched in white-knuckled hands. Elena stood on the porch, her sleeve torn, blood staining her arm. But her eyes were steady, her stance unbroken. She had faced the fire, the steel, the rage of men who thought her weak, and she was still standing. Caldwell turned to her, shaking his head. "You terrify 'em, widow. And maybe that's the only thing that'll keep this place standing." The townsfolk arrived not long after Q, drawn by the gunfire and smoke. They stood at the edge of the yard, staring at the wreckage, the trampled dirt, the blackened haystack, the scarred cowboy bound and bleeding at Caldwell's feet. Whispers spread like wildfire. She fought them off. 3 against 1, and she still stands. Maybe she's cursed, or maybe she's blessed. Eleanor met their eyes one by one. Some looked at her with awe, others with fear, but none could deny what they had seen. She had stood when no one else would. By dawn, the smoke over Elena's farm had drifted into Dry Creek, carrying with it the story everyone already knew. Men and women gathered in the square before the mercantile, their voices raised in arguments that spilled over each other. Some called her a savior, others a curse, and the line between the two grew sharper by the hour. Sheriff Caldwell tried to quiet them from the steps of his office. "You all saw it," he barked. "That woman stood her ground against fire and knives. If she hadn't, we'd be burying half this town by now. You ought to be thanking her, not spitting her name like poison." But a rancher shouted back, "Thank her for bringing hell on us. Those boys won't stop. Their kin'll ride down from the range, and when they do, we'll all burn with her." Others muttered agreement. Fear rippled through the crowd. Then Daniel Harper raised his voice, steady and fierce. "You cowards talk of peace, but you mean surrender. That widow's got more grit than any 10 of you standing here. She saved her land, and she saved Dry Creek's pride while you cowered in your beds." A murmur of support rose from the younger men, Jonah Price's voice cutting through. "If she can face them, so can we. You talk about danger. Well, danger's already here. Better to meet it standing than crawling." The square erupted, half shouting agreement, half jeering. Caldwell's mustache twitched as he slammed his fist against the railing. "Enough! You want to split this town in 2? That's how you lose everything. We stand together or we fall one by one." But the words didn't mend the fracture. As the crowd dispersed, people eyed each other like strangers, suspicion heavy in the air. Elena entered town later that morning, her arm still bandaged from the fight. Every step she took was followed by whispers. Mothers pulled their children close, as if her shadow might curse them. Yet others stopped her in the street, tipping their hats, pressing bread into her hands, murmuring, "God bless you, widow." She carried both burdens, praise and suspicion, without a word, her face calm, though her heart ached. At the jailhouse, the scarred cowboy sat bound and seething. He spat through the bars when Elena passed. "You think you've won? You think one night makes you safe? You're dead, woman. Dead and buried, even if the ground don't know it yet." Caldwell slammed the cell shut harder than necessary, his voice rough. "You've said enough." But when he turned to Elena, his eyes were tired. "He's right about one thing. This ain't over. You hurt their pride, and pride is bloodthirsty." Elena met his gaze steadily. "Then let them come. I'll meet them again." That evening, the town split further. In the saloon, a group of men argued about riding out to confront the cowboys' kin before they struck again. In the church hall, others whispered about forcing Elena to leave to spare Dry Creek more bloodshed. Fear and anger swirled, and Caldwell could barely keep order. Daniel stood with her on the porch that night, watching lanterns flicker in the distance. "They'll turn on you before long," he said quietly. "Half of them already want you gone. The other half just don't say it out loud." Eleanor's eyes stayed on the horizon. "Then I'll stand whether they stand with me or not." Jonah arrived with a bundle of iron spikes, his face smeared with soot. "I'm with you, ma'am. Doesn't matter what the rest say." Daniel clapped the boy's shoulder. "You're a fool," he muttered, though his eyes shone with pride. The three of them worked in silence, reinforcing the fence, repairing the barn, setting traps along the yard. Every hammer strike echoed with defiance, but as the night deepened, the unease grew. The torches on the ridge had vanished, replaced by something worse: silence. The desert held its breath, waiting. Inside the farmhouse, Eleanor sat by the window, the knife at her belt, the rifle across her lap. She could feel the weight of every whisper in town pressing against her. To some, she was a savior. To others, a curse. And in that moment, she understood what terrified them most. It wasn't the cowboys or the fire or the blood. It was her, the widow who would not bend, who stood when others knelt. The church bell tolled at dusk, its hollow clang pulling every soul in Dry Creek toward the hall. Word had spread that the riders from the northern range, kin of the jailed cowboys, were camped no more than a day's ride away. Smoke from their fires curled into the evening sky, a grim reminder of what waited just beyond the horizon. Inside the hall, the air was stifling, thick with fear. Men crowded the pews, women stood at the back, and children huddled close, wide-eyed. Sheriff Caldwell stood at the front, hat in hand, his mustache twitching as he tried to quiet the rising clamor. "This town stands on a knife's edge," he said, his voice carrying over the noise. "The riders will come. That's certain. What ain't certain is how we meet them." A rancher shot to his feet. "We meet them by giving them what they want. Hand the widow over, and this ends without blood." Shouts of agreement erupted, filling the hall. Eleanor stood at the back, her arms crossed, her face carved from stone. She didn't flinch under the glares, though each one pressed like a brand. Daniel Harper rose next, his voice booming. "You think handing her over will save you? Fools. You hand her to them. You tell every outlaw, every raider, every thief from here to Santa Fe that Dry Creek bends to fear, and once they know that, they'll never stop taking." Some clapped, others hissed. The divide split the hall in two. Jonah Price pushed forward, his young voice breaking with passion. "I was there. I saw her stand when no one else did. She fought for her land, for her husband's memory, for this town. You give her up, and you give up yourselves." The sheriff slammed his fist on the pulpit. "Enough. We'll have order." His voice dropped. Grave. "We're not just deciding her fate. We're deciding what kind of town we are. If we protect her, we risk war. If we give her up, we lose our soul. So which is it?" The hall fell into uneasy silence. Then, slowly, voices rose, some for protection, some for surrender. The argument swelled again until it became a roar, echoing off the rafters. Through it all, Elena remained still, her gaze steady on the sheriff. Finally, she stepped forward, her voice cutting through the din like a blade. "You're arguing about me as if I'm not here," she said, calm but fierce. "But I am, and I've made my choice. This land is mine. My husband died for it, and I will not walk away. You want to hand me over? Try it. But you'll have to put me in the ground first." Her words stunned the hall into silence. Faces turned, some with awe, others with fear. The rancher who had shouted before sneered. "You'll drag us all down with you." Elena's eyes burned. "No, I'll show you how to stand. Whether you follow or not is up to you." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Caldwell exhaled, his shoulders sagging. "There it is. She's made her stand. Now we must make ours." When the meeting broke, the town spilled into the square, still divided, still whispering. Some muttered about taking matters into their own hands, others about fortifying the streets. Fear hung heavier than the desert night. Back at the farm, Daniel and Jonah worked alongside Eleanor, preparing for what they all knew was coming. They stacked barrels by the barn doors, filled buckets with water, and laid out ammunition. The corral horses stamped nervously, sensing the tension in the air. Daniel paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "If the town doesn't come, it'll be just us." Elena tightened the strap on her rifle. "Then it'll be just us. I've stood alone before." Jonah's hammer rang against iron spikes, his voice firm. "Not alone this time. Not while I've got breath." Elena looked at them both, her heart heavy but steady. The storm was coming, and whether Dry Creek stood with her or cast her aside, she would not yield. As the sun sank, the glow of distant fires burned brighter on the horizon. The riders were close now, too close. She stood on the porch, the night pressing in around her, her rifle heavy in her hands. The desert wind carried the faint echo of laughter, men's voices drifting from beyond the hills. Elena whispered into the darkness, her words carried on the wind. "Let them come. They'll learn what it means to face someone who won't bow." The first light of dawn crept over the desert, painting the horizon in streaks of pale gold and blood red. Dry Creek lay hushed beneath it, every window shuttered, every door barred. The streets, usually clattering with wagons and boots by sunrise, stood empty, as if the town itself held its breath. From her porch, Elena watched the ridge where the riders' fires had burned through the night. The flames had died, but the smoke still rose in thin grey coils. She knew what it meant. They hadn't left. They were waiting. Daniel Harper arrived before sunrise, his shotgun across his saddle. His face was drawn, eyes shadowed from a sleepless night. He dismounted heavily. "They'll ride at first light. I can feel it in my bones." Elena nodded once, her rifle steady in her hands. "Then we'll meet them at first light." Not long after, Jonah Price appeared, his horse lathered with sweat from a hard ride. He carried a sack of iron spikes and a hammer, dropping them with a clang by the porch. His cheeks were pale, but his jaw set firm. "They'll test the town first," he said breathlessly. "See if anyone stops them. And if no one does, they'll come straight here." Daniel muttered darkly, "And I don't reckon anyone will stop them." The silence of Dry Creek echoed his words. No patrols walked the street. No deputies stood watch. The sheriff's office remained shuttered. Fear had driven the town indoors, and now, on the morning that mattered most, Elena saw clearly that she could not rely on them. She stepped off the porch, her boots crunching in the dust. "Then it's us. 3 against however many they bring." Jonah clenched his hammer. "Three's enough if we don't break." The boy's words sparked something inside her, a memory, sharp and sudden, her husband's voice, years ago, telling her much the same as they built the first fence line together. "We're only 2, but if we stand straight, we're stronger than 10 who bow." The sun climbed higher, and with it came the sound. Hoofbeats. Distant at first, then growing. A low thunder rolling across the desert. Elena's breath tightened. She raised her rifle and set her feet firmly in the dirt. The riders appeared over the ridge like a dark tide, torches raised, guns glinting in the light. There were more than a dozen, kin of the jailed men, friends drawn by pride and vengeance. Dust rose around them as they thundered down the slope, their shouts piercing the morning silence. Eleanor felt Daniel tense beside her, heard Jonah's breath quicken, but she did not move. She stood tall, her silhouette framed by the rising sun. The riders slowed as they reached the edge of her land. Their leader, a broad man with a red bandana tied across his neck, raised his hand. The horses stamped restlessly, snorting clouds into the cool air. "Widow," he called, his voice booming across the yard. "You've made a fool of my kin. You've shamed them in front of all. We've come to take back what's ours and to bury what ain't." The men behind him whooped, their guns raised high. Elena lifted her chin. "This land is mine. My husband died on it. I've worked it with my hands, bled for it, fought for it. You want it? Try and take it." The words hung in the air, sharp as steel. For a heartbeat, silence fell. Even the riders seemed taken aback by her calm defiance. Then the leader laughed, cruel and hollow. "So be it." He dropped his hand. The riders spurred forward, the ground trembling beneath their charge. Daniel raised his shotgun, Jonah hefted his hammer, and Elena steadied her rifle, the barrel glinting in the sun. But before the first shot rang, movement stirred in the town. Doors slammed open, boots thundered against the boardwalk. Men with rifles, women with pistols, even a handful of boys barely grown, spilled into the street. Sheriff Caldwell stood at the front, his revolver raised high. His voice carried like a whip crack. "Dry Creek don't bow to outlaws. You want the widow? You go through all of us." The riders reined in, startled by the sudden line of townsfolk forming behind Elena. Dozens of guns gleamed in the light, their barrels steady. For the first time, Elena felt something shift. She was no longer alone. The choice had been made. The leader snarled, his pride cornered, his men restless. The morning air quivered with the weight of what would happen next. The standoff stretched long enough for the sun to rise higher, painting every gun barrel in blinding light. The riders fidgeted, their horses restless beneath them, but their leader's pride would not let him back down. He spat into the dirt and barked, "So this is how it is? A town hiding behind a widow?" Caldwell's voice cracked across the yard. "Not hiding, standing." The men of Dry Creek tightened their grips. The women raised pistols with trembling but steady hands, and Jonah stood tall at Elena's side, hammer poised like it was forged for this very moment. Daniel racked his shotgun with a deliberate click, his jaw set. The leader sneered and raised his arm. "Burn them out!" A rider flung a torch toward the widow's barn. Before it landed, Elena fired. The bullet struck dead center, shattering the torch midair in a spray of fire and splinters. Gasps erupted behind her. Even the riders faltered, the horses skittish. Elena's voice rang clear. "Try again, and the next shot won't hit wood," the leader roared, wounded pride twisting his face. "Ride them down!" Chaos exploded. The riders charged, hooves pounding the earth like thunder. Dry Creek answered with a wall of gunfire. Muzzle flashes lit the morning Osao, bullets snapping through the air. Horses screamed, men shouted, the desert shook with fury. Daniel fired both barrels of his shotgun, dropping a rider from his horse. Jonah swung his hammer against another who tried to dismount, the iron cracking bone with a sickening thud. The young blacksmith fought like a man twice his age, his fire unyielding. But it was Eleanor who held the line. Calm, precise, every shot from her rifle struck with purpose. She moved as though the land itself guided her aim, dropping torches, knocking revolvers from hands, cutting down the bravest who dared rush too close. The leader barreled forward, his revolver raised, eyes fixed on her. Bullets tore past her, one grazing her sleeve, but she stood unmoved. She sighted him down, her finger steady on the trigger. The moment slowed, the dust rising, the shouts fading, only his eyes locked on hers. She fired. The shot struck his hat clean off, grazing his scalp, close enough that blood ran into his eyes. His horse bucked wildly, throwing him into the dirt. The riders faltered, stunned to see their leader sprawled in the dust, his pride shattered in front of the whole town. Sheriff Caldwell seized the moment. "Stand! Dry Creek!" he bellowed. "Drive 'em back!" The townsfolk surged forward, their gunfire fierce, their voices lifted in defiance. The riders, once so confident, reeled under the storm. Two fell, another fled outright, spurring his horse back toward the ridge. The leader staggered to his feet, blood streaking his face, fury burning in his eyes. He grabbed his revolver, leveling it at Elena. "You'll die for this, woman." Before he could fire, Jonah stepped between them, hammer raised. The bullet struck the hammer's iron head, ricocheting harmlessly. Jonah roared, swinging with all his strength, sending the revolver clattering away. Elena stepped forward, her rifle steady, her voice cold as stone. "You wanted me. Here I am." The leader's knees buckled, his courage bleeding into the dirt. Around him, his men pulled back, their charge broken, their pride crushed. They dragged him onto a horse, retreating in a storm of dust and curses, their torches abandoned in the sand. Silence fell heavy when the last hoofbeat faded. The townsfolk lowered their rifles, panting, eyes wide with disbelief. The barn smoldered but stood. The farmhouse was untouched, and at the center of it all stood the widow, blood on her arm, smoke in her hair, but unbroken. Caldwell approached, his face a mix of awe and relief. "By God, you held them." Elena lowered her rifle slowly, her voice steady despite the trembling in her bones. "I told them. This land is mine." Behind her, Jonah leaned on his hammer, exhausted but grinning through soot-streaked cheeks. Daniel clapped his shoulder, pride softening his gruff features. Around them, the people of Dry Creek stared in silence, not at a victim, not at a curse, but at the woman who had stood when all others might have fallen. And for the first time, they understood why the riders had feared her reaction. It wasn't madness or curse or stubborn pride. It was something far stronger, the unbreakable will of someone who refused to bow, no matter the cost. The dust from the battle took hours to settle, but the silence that followed was louder than the gunfire had been. Dry Creek stood in shock, its people scattered across the widow's farmyard, staring at the blackened hay, the bullet-pocked fences, and the trail of hoofprints vanishing into the horizon. For years they had muttered about her pride, whispered about curses and stubbornness. Now they had seen what that pride truly meant. She had faced down a dozen armed riders and refused to bend, and the whole town had stood behind her because she dared to stand first. Sheriff Caldwell broke the silence. He stood in the yard, revolver still in hand, his mustache trembling with the weight of what had just passed. "It's done," he said, his voice low. "They won't forget tonight, but neither will we." Some nodded in agreement. Others looked uneasy, knowing the truth, that men like the riders did not disappear so easily. But for the moment, the fear that had gripped Dry Creek was gone, burned away by the sight of a widow who would not bow. Jonah Price leaned on his hammer, his face streaked with soot and sweat. "Told you she'd show us how to stand," he said with a crooked grin. "Now the whole territory will know it." Daniel Harper wiped blood from his brow, his eyes on Elena. "You've done more than save your farm. You've given this town back its backbone." Elena said nothing. She stood on the porch, her rifle across her knees, staring at the horizon where the riders had fled. She knew they were not finished. Pride was a fire that smoldered long after it seemed extinguished. But she also knew something had shifted forever. The next days brought a strange calm. The townsfolk who had once whispered curses now brought bread and water to her farm. Women arrived with baskets of food. Men helped mend the fences. Boys carried buckets to wash the soot from her barn. Not all were friendly. Some still kept their distance, but none could deny what they had witnessed. Whispers of her defiance spread beyond Dry Creek. Travelers carried the tale downriver. Ranchers repeated it at distant campfires. Soon, men who had never met her spoke of the Apache widow who had faced down an army and terrified them into retreat. But for Elena, life returned to its rhythm. She rose at dawn, fed her animals, mended her fences, and walked the rows of corn that had nearly withered in the drought. Her arm healed slowly, leaving a scar she wore like a badge. The land was scarred too, blackened in places, but alive, just like her. One evening, as the sun bled across the desert, Sheriff Caldwell rode out. He dismounted at her gate, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "You know they'll try again someday." "Men like that don't forgive," Elena nodded. "Then I'll be ready." Caldwell studied her a long moment, then tipped his hat. "So will we." When he rode away, Daniel and Jonah sat with her on the porch. Jonah fiddled with his hammer, still restless from youth. Daniel leaned back, weary but smiling faintly. "Funny thing," he muttered. "They used to whisper you were a curse. Now they whisper you're the reason Dry Creek still stands." Elena looked out at the horizon, her voice calm. "Whispers don't matter. Standing does." The wind rustled through the cornfield, carrying her words into the dusk. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of her solitude lift, replaced by something steadier. Not comfort, not safety, but respect. And that was enough. Her husband's grave lay on the hill beyond the barn. That night she walked there alone, the stars burning bright overhead. She knelt, brushing dust from the wooden marker, her voice quiet. "I kept it. I kept our land. And they finally see why I could never walk away." The desert was silent, but in the stillness she felt an answer, as if the earth itself acknowledged what she had done. When she rose, she turned back toward the farmhouse, its windows glowing with firelight. Jonah's laughter carried from the porch, Daniel's voice gruff beside it. For the first time in years, the farm did not feel empty. Elena knew storms would come again. The riders were not gone, only wounded in pride. But she also knew this. When they returned, she would not face them alone, and even if she did, she would not bow. In the end, Eleanor's story was not just about a farm or a feud. It was about what happens when one person refuses to yield, even when the world demands surrender. Her stand reminded Dry Creek, and perhaps all of us, that fear can break a town, but courage can rebuild it. And sometimes, courage is as simple as standing your ground when everyone else turns away. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe and join us for the next tale of resilience and defiance. And before you go, check out the video we've linked here. You won't want to miss it.